A child is safe and unharmed after he went missing last week. TV20's Ethan Badowski joins us live from the Gainesville Police Department. And Ethan, what can you tell us about the fallout from this case now that the child has been found?
Paige, 3 people are in jail tonight in relation to the child that went missing over the weekend. 13-year-old Ian Stevens was found by Clay County Sheriff's deputies after he was taken there by a person he knew. Stevens went missing last Thursday, and video surveillance that contradicted a witness testimony led investigators to a person of interest. That person was Tiffany Mejia, who authorities say took Stevens to where he was found in Clay County. Her motive remains unclear.
At this point, the investigation's still open, and our main purpose was to get the child back and know that the child was safe, and that's what we were doing. We're trying to kind of iron out everything else that's involved in the case, anybody else that might be involved in the case.
Mejia is facing multiple charges, including interference with child custody. Stevens' grandparents, who had custody of him, are also in jail tonight, facing charges of child neglect. Police say that Stevens is safe, but could not disclose information about his whereabouts. Reporting live in Gainesville, Ethan Badowski, TV20 News.